Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm sure whether you like what I have to say or not, you're probably happy not to be having class, so that works. As your professor said, I have taught in the program here for a couple of years. My main gig is as the Dean of the School of Management at Bay State College here in Boston. Also a proud BU alum, master's program from back before when most of you were born. And most of my career before going into academia was in marketing, human resource management, entrepreneurship, small business development. So a lot of the skills I want to talk to you about today relate to that experience, relate to what I do academically as well. Y'all know what I'm going to talk about today? What's that?
Professional communication.
There you go. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Very important concept here. Why do we care about our communication style, what sort of impact our communication might have? Rising tones do indicate questions, by the way. That's part of the presentation. What are some of the key factors for us? What are the key takeaways we're looking for from professional communication? Absolutely, right? We want to be able to communicate and receive knowledge, right? We want to be able to deliver information about a particular point. What else are we looking to do?
Relationships?
Absolutely. Looking to establish a rapport with another person, groups of people, based on shared interests, shared goals, right? Okay. What else are we trying to do?
Share information.
Yeah, definitely trying to share information. Definitely want to let people know what we know, right?
Being able to control the way we present ourselves in the way that we want to maybe be seen.
Absolutely. We might even think about that in terms of personal branding, if you will, right? Creating a professional, personal image of yourself, social image as well, that aids and guides your interactions with others, right?
Being able to make the requests clear.
Absolutely, right? When you want or need something, the better able you are to communicate it, the more likely you are to get exactly what you need, right? Or at least have the other party understand what your needs are. Okay? Somebody back here had one too? Absolutely, absolutely. Every interaction should be a learning interaction as well, right? And keep in mind, whether you end up in the planning profession per se or some related field, as part of your day-to-day job, you are going to need to communicate with people across very different arenas. I just want to go over some of the things I'll touch on. By the way, I'm a teacher by profession, which means I love questions. Right? They let me know what you want to know more about. They let me know what you don't quite understand. And of course, they make me feel important. So jump in at any point with any questions on your mind, or even to disagree. I like that too. Okay. Would it be possible to do a quick round of introductions before we jump in? Okay. I'll start out over here because I know you guys already. So.
Steve, this is my second semester city planning program. What else would you like to know? If there's a question.
Credit card number, date, 3 little numbers on the back.
5262. I'm from.
And where you're from?
Yeah,
I'm always curious about that because I'm a nosy person.
I'm from Helena, Montana. I've been here for 10 years, so I'm from here.
Excellent. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Raquel Castro-Corazini. This is my second year in the Urban Affairs program, and I'm from Worcester, and I work for local city government in Worcester.
Beautiful. Thank you, thank you.
My name is Tiffany, and this is also my second year, and I work for city government in Framingham, but I'm from Worcester. And something?
That works. You got it all. Thank you, my friend. How about you?
Hi, my name is Hu Jiming. I come from China, and this is my second semester here. I'm in the planning program.
Excellent, excellent. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Regine. This is my first semester in the UA program, and I'm from Hyde Park, and I work for the city in the city clerk's office.
Excellent.
I'm Jess. This is my second year in the MCP program, and I'm originally from Los Angeles, California.
And we don't hold that against you.
I'm trying to forgive.
I'm Lori Tigana. I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I work for a real estate investment company that invests in affordable housing.
Great.
My name's Brooke. I grew up in Boston, Hyde Park, and I work at BU at the Danielson Institute.
My name's Ronnie. It's my second year in the Urban Affairs program. I'm from Rosendale originally, and I don't like the evil sticker on your laptop.
And it begins.
Hey, you have the 2005 Super Bowl. Let me have this moment. Every year of my life, they have not won a Super Bowl. Okay? When you got 0 rings, we'll talk.
Hi, I'm Ludwig. I come from China. What do you want?
I'm a very nosy person, my friend. So, and which program are you in?
I'm in city planning. This is my first semester.
Welcome. Welcome. I hope you're having fun.
Thank you.
I'm Elena. This is also my first semester at the city planning program, and I'm from St. Louis, Missouri.
Beautiful. Very nice.
My name's Matt. This is my third semester of the city planning program. I'm originally from Lexington, Mass, so very close. But I lived for about a decade on the West Coast. So I consider myself part West Coast.
There we go. Well, welcome. Good to have you here.
I'm Nora. I grew up in Milton. This is my first semester in the city planning program, and I work for City Hall.
Great. Damn good city.
My name is Kylie. I come from China. This is my first semester in city planning.
Excellent. Excellent. Don't worry. I know you're on the job today, but.
Hi, I'm Joya. I'm from China. This is my third semester. I will say I love your class so much. That research.
That doesn't mean she didn't love your class as well, Professor.
It's not over.
But there's a communications lesson in that for you, Don. Well,
I hope I
Ms.
didn't cut you off.
It's coming at me. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Well, they may not.
Ciminelli, I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I'm the program manager for city planning and urban affairs.
So all your troubles, she takes care of, really.
That's right. That's right. Very well. Very well.
Hi, I'm Diego. I'm from Venezuela. I'm in my second semester in the city planning program. I am the one who had stolen your chair when you entered.
Yeah, we remember that.
Yeah, that's, you think I've forgotten? No,
I
no,
know.
no. Nice to meet you.
I'm Lauren. I'm a non-degree student. This is the only class I'm taking. I'm from Roxbury.
Excellent. Welcome. You picked the right class to start with then.
So glad you could join us. One second, just
Okay.
let me come.
Welcome. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Megan. Hi. I'm Fiona. I'm in the MCP program. And I'm from Quincy, and I'm also on the PPP class. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Fiona has been a valuable resource in every which way. All through the summer, she has been on this course. So, great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christian. I'm from Chile. I'm the MCP program. This is my second semester.
Excellent. Nice to see you.
Hi, my name is Serena. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm a non-degree student. I'm taking this class and another class.
Which other one?
Urban economics.
Oh, good choice. Excellent. Nice to meet you.
Hey, I'm Joyce. It's my first semester in the urban affairs program, and
And where are you from?
Georgia.
Oh, excellent. Nice. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Dylan. I am in my second year of actually the Education, Leadership, and Policy program in SED, and I grew up in Connecticut.
Hi, I'm Tyler. This is my first semester in the Master's of City Planning program, and I'm from New Jersey.
Which part?
Princeton.
Okay, okay. So you're more likely to be an Eagles fan than a Giants fan?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take the half-hearted response. It's all I'm getting in this crowd, I guess. My Eagles.
Hi, I'm Kara. I'm from Boston, and this is my first semester as an urban planning student.
Hi, I'm Kelly. It's my first semester in the MCP program, and I'm from Philadelphia.
Good man. The rest of you can leave. Kelly and I can have a moment. That's it. Which part of Philly, if I may ask?
My dad grew up in the Northeast. My mom grew up in Cheltenham, but we live in Buxton.
Oh, sounds like my family too. So.
Yeah.
That's where his family is.
Oh yeah.
Now, yeah. I mean, I grew up in the city.
Okay.
Sears on the Boulevard. Now, Yardley, Lower Makefield, that area. Yeah.
Oh God.
Practically. We're practically
Exactly.
related. So.
Yeah. The romance is brilliant.
It is.
Hi, I'm Deb. This is my first semester in the Master's of Urban Affairs program. I'm from outside of Boston, and I work at a law firm.
Excellent. Oh, welcome. Welcome.
I'm Molly. This is my second semester as a pre-degree student, and I'm from Saratoga Springs.
Hi, I'm Cynthia. This is my first semester in the Urban Affairs program. And
Eugene, my first semester in Urban Affairs, and I work for the Health Department. I'm from Milton, but I rep Dorchester.
A little more street cred.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right?
I'm Steven. This is my first semester as a city planning master's. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and currently I'm working at an architecture firm in Boston.
Excellent. And last but not least, my friend.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Musazi, born and raised in Uganda, Africa. This is my last semester in Urban Affairs.
Well, congratulations on that. So nice to meet you all. Thank you for taking the time to humor me on that. Oh, I sorry, forgot you because you came in. Sorry.
You always forget the late guy.
Do tell me, sir.
My name is Carl. I live in Whitman, but I actually really claim Philadelphia.
Another good man.
Chestnut
You're not just blowing smoke for me, are you, here,
I'm
my
not.
friend?
Chestnut Hill area.
Excellent.
This is my first semester in the city planning program.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything else I was supposed to say?
Credit card number, you missed that part.
Oh yeah. I like moonlight walks.
Welcome, my friend. Thank you. So, when you introduce yourself, what you choose to reveal or not to reveal is very important, right? Shows what you value, shows what you think other people may be interested in, right? Now, of course, I prompted you, but think about how that plays out for you in all sorts of interactions, because as my friend Steve over here pointed out, every interaction, every aspect of communication is a time to build your brand, right? So, we're going to talk about some key ideas, types of interactions you may not think of are open to professional communication, but really are. What you're trying to achieve, some principles, some etiquette ideas, but focus on in verbal, written communication, and especially in sort of employment written communication, resumes, cover letters, that kind of thing, how you should proceed. So, I want to hammer these 4 words home for you as bywords to govern every time you're communicating verbally or in writing. First is clarity. Making your meaning as clear to the intended audience as possible is key. Now, there may be times where you don't want someone to know exactly what you're thinking or what you're saying. Different situation. Generally speaking, though, clarity should always be in the forefront of what you're aiming to do. Second is conciseness. My favorite saying about writing goes something like this. If you can say the same thing using fewer words, do so. If you can say the same thing using fewer words, do so. Part of the reason why English has become the world language for business and for academia is because it can be a very efficient language. The largest language in the world in terms of vocabulary. About double the size of the next largest world language, which would be German. English has almost 1 million words in it. Now, does any language need 1 million words? Oh, hell no. Spanish and French get by just fine with about 100,000. Right? But part of the precision that English affords you is the ability to be more concise, to say things more succinctly, more directly. And it's also part of what we think of as good communication style in American or British English. Right? Not true for every language. A language such as Spanish often builds repetition into it. Right? You say the same thing over a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. That's how you communicate in certain languages. Right? English, no. Should be straightforward, direct, concise, and as precise as possible. Now, next point is correctness. Right? In these days of spell check and Microsoft Word, we still screw it up all the time, don't we, folks? Okay. The problem is this. Whether it's in an interpersonal or a professional setting, errors in your spoken language and especially in your written language will be noticed and will be black marks against you on a certain level. Okay? Now, if English is not your first language, oftentimes there'll be a little bit more understanding there, but not always. Focusing on grammatically correct usage and correct vocabulary really will make a huge impression on whatever audience you're going for. And it all wraps up with cogency. How convincing is your writing? Keep in mind, no matter what you're trying to achieve, you still need to convince someone. Even if you're presenting information, you need to convince them that that information is correct and valuable, worth listening to. All right? But more often than not, one of our objectives when we are talking to people, when we are writing, is to convince them that our ideas are correct, that our positions are correct, that they should take action based on what we're writing. And that comes back to knowing the audience. Another key theme I want to touch upon a few more times tonight. Know who you're talking to and understand what their level of comprehension is, what their context for what you're going to talk about is. Pull all that together in framing how you direct it. The same goals to two different audiences should look very different in presentation when you're trying to achieve different things. So, I want you to think about all of these as avenues for professional communication. Obviously, a face-to-face meeting, whether it's in a professional context, maybe it's an interview, etc., okay, obviously falls within the realm of professional communication. But you should still treat face-to-face meetings that aren't necessarily professional from the start as if they had those elements too. Obviously, if you're presenting to a group, talking to a group of people, like I'm doing now, you have to employ good professional communication skills. Think about it on the telephone. Telephone can be very difficult. What makes communicating by phone so difficult, folks?
You can't see the look on the other person's face, so you have to read their feelings by their voice.
Absolutely. Your only cues are the oral ones you're getting, right? And let's face it, you know they're not paying full attention if they're just on the phone with you, right? You're not paying full attention when you're on the phone with them, are you?
Looking at your computer screen.
There you go, see? So there are harder clues to get there, right? And there's not a question of full attention, right? It can also be very difficult, especially if there's any sort of language barrier to communicate via phone. Skype in the same ballpark. If you add in the video part, well, it just gets kind of creepy, but still useful. Keep in mind, email should be treated as professional communication. Email is more like a letter and less like a text message. Okay? And that's one theme I want to come back to. And then, of course, formal writing, whether it's on the employment side, as we talked about, whether it's reports, position papers, whatever it happens to be, internal communications for your organization. Right? So principles are the same no matter what type of communication you're engaging in. Oral or written across many different media, right? And the context for it, a one-on-one, small group. What you don't want to have is this, right? So hang with me, guys, if you would. Okay? So think about what you want to accomplish whenever you're going to be communicating. And again, these principles apply to both oral and written communication. Maybe you just want to provide information. We talked about that. Very common. But you know what? Rarely is this a true standalone. Usually you're trying to do this and something else, such as persuade. That your information is valuable, that people should take action on what you're talking about, that people should be persuaded that what you're saying is something they should believe. Communication can also be about building a network. Finding people who, personally or professionally, add to your skill set. People with whom you might be able to collaborate. People with whom you might work together at some point in the future. It can also be for employment. Always, though, keep coming back to this. Every time you're communicating in any sort of professional or semi-professional context, you are marketing yourself. Are you a good product, Ms. Martinez?
Am I a good product? I would say so.
I would say so too, absolutely, right? So you have to be confident that you're putting your best brand forward in every single interaction. Okay? So some of the things to keep in mind. Now, we may err a little on the side of old-fashioned / conservative here. I know. Hard, isn't it? Okay? Why? Well, keep in mind. Look around the room. Most of you would fall into the millennial generation category, right? Most of the people for whom you're looking to work are probably more my age, right? Well, maybe not that old, but certainly older than you folks, right? Okay. Many of the policymakers with whom you may be working, senior officials, again, older generation. Okay? And I'll tell you something, it is never lost on Gen Xers and especially baby boomers when you go that extra step and provide formal email, formal written communication. A sign of professionalism, a sign of maturity. That's how it's always taken. Strong piece of advice, don't leave off the titles. Dear Dr. Smith, Professor Dr. Koehler. Or not. President, no, I can't say that. I'm sorry. Yeah, too scary. Formal address, very important in that way. You set a tone. You set a business-like tone, right? This is especially important when you don't know someone well yet. Right. In my current role, I do a lot of hiring. I set up agreements, collaborations with people from different agencies, etc. I always notice, and not in a good way, when someone who doesn't know me addresses me by my first name. Right? That sets a tone. That's okay. It sets a tone, and not a tone of over formality that cuts down on my estimation of that person's professionalism. Right? Now, once you get to know someone, once you've taken that initial step, sure, then you let your hair down, but not before. Please and thank you, folks. Love. Never a sign of weakness. Yes.
I was just going to say, I was just in a hiring committee, and the two candidates were like deadlocked. Like we weren't sure who to go with, and one of the candidates sent like thank you cards, and the committee went like, wow, they just like loved it, and it like literally was the deal maker for that person in getting that position.
Thank you very much. I did not plant her in the room as a ringer, but that story illustrates exactly what I'm talking about. Going the extra mile, showing someone that you value their time and that you consider them someone worthy of your respect through how you write to them and how you communicate with them pays off in the long run, right? We're not doing it just to be nice, right? Again, proper grammar, an important part of etiquette. The message, there are only two messages I take from an email or any other written communication with bad grammar. I don't know which one is worse. First lesson is, he or she was hurrying, didn't have time to check it over. Well, that sends a message of a lack of professionalism, right? It also is a little screw you to me. I'm not worth the time to get it right. The other message you can take is the person doesn't know. Well, then the person's dumb, right? So either lazy or dumb. These are the two takeaways from bad grammar. Okay? Don't fall into those two traps. Okay? Now, granted, when you're dealing with friends and family, as it were, not such a big deal. Well, it is if you were family with me. But otherwise, no. But any sort of professional context, make sure of this big time. Okay? And also, right, basic principle in any type of communication, you want to keep emotions out. This is especially an issue with email. How many of you have gotten really, really upset at someone, shot off an email that was a little on the nasty side, and regretted it? How about drunk texting? There we go. Same basic concept, right? Okay. Keep in mind, folks, when you do send any sort of professional communication in writing, you're creating a paper trail for yourself, right? That can, bless you, that can work for you or against you, all right? Make sure you're very comfortable with what you're putting out via email, via any form of writing, because you're stuck with it, right? And it's there to come back to haunt you. So let's talk a little bit about verbal communication. Okay? It can, whether you're looking at sort of smaller ideas, you're meeting someone one-on-one, you're meeting a small group of people, or you're talking to an audience. A lot of the basic principles are the same, right? First is appearance. Don't like to talk about this, but it's true. Especially if you are younger or have less professional experience to date, how you dress makes a huge difference on how you will be received, how your communication, how your message will get out there. Is that a good thing? No, I don't think so. It's shallow. But it's human, absolutely, right? So always make sure you dress at a level of professionalism a half step above what you think would be appropriate for the event or for the audience. Sure, you may be able to get away with just a jacket. Bring the tie along just in case, right? These little things can make a huge difference on how people will hear your message. Whether their ears will be open right from the start, or you've got to work to get them open. Now, your voice is a very powerful instrument, folks, and most of us do a horrible, horrible job of using our voices as that instrument. Okay? 4 things I want to talk about with your voice. Okay? First is pace. The speed at which you speak makes a huge difference in how listeners perceive it. Right? If I'm getting my drawl on, talking a little too slow, you're already starting to nod off, my friend, right? Okay? That could be useful. Okay? I don't want to go all New York on y'all and start to spew out my words way too quickly so you have no clue what the hell I'm saying anymore. Okay? Obviously both are bad. The point though is, when we don't vary the pace at which we speak, listeners tune out. Make sure that you're consciously keeping your regular speaking voice at a faster clip, but then when you want to emphasize a point, slow down. When you think you might be losing your audience, slow down. Okay? Use that in combination with tone. Now, I wish I had a Barry White type voice, you know, that deep bass. Oh, love that. Okay? I don't. It's okay. The key here with tone is to keep your regular speaking voice pitched a little higher than you would normally do, but then for emphasis, lower your tone somewhat. Okay? Third is volume, same idea. Okay? Now, those of you who've been in my class know I'm loud. Okay? I'm very loud at times. But when I change the volume, when I go from being fairly loud like this to suddenly softer, well, now people stand up and pay attention a little bit more. Right? So the three factors here I talked about, pace, tone, and volume, all are very powerful as long as you vary them for emphasis. That's your real key. Okay? Otherwise, you know, you end up
Volume on there.
Yes. Just too soft.
The volume up over there. There we go.
The Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
So, some of you probably remember that clip from the movie. Ben Stein, real-world economist, by the way. Also real-world misogynist, we won't go there. But what makes that seem funny, and what makes his voice so boring there, is the lack of modulation. Volume, pace, and tone. Doesn't change things up, so our ears tune out. That's what we want to avoid, folks. Okay? You also want to think about eye contact. Okay? Now, you want to avoid the extremes in eye contact when you're in one-on-one or small group. Right? You don't want to be staring at people the whole time. It can be a little bit unnerving. Okay? Perhaps legally actionable, depending on your relationship with the people. But you don't want to avoid eye contact either. Okay? You want to make sure to have the greatest majority of your eye contact when?
Speaking directly to someone.
When you're speaking directly to someone?
Speaking directly to you.
Yes, or when they're speaking directly to you, right? That's the real key time, when it's that one-on-one conversation, especially when you're listening, right? It shows sincerity when you make eye contact with someone who's speaking to you, okay? When you're looking at a bigger group, as today, then it's a little bit different, right? Here again, you want to change things up a bit, but there are several keys to keep in mind. First is, do not make the mistake too many presenters do, and I've even heard this given as advice for those who get nervous in public speaking, staring at a point in the back of the room. Okay? That's mierda, folks. That's a terrible way to present. Terrible way to connect with your audience. What you want to be able to do is 3 types of eye contact when you're looking with a group. Okay? The first type is the general eye contact swoop, right? Hey folks, how you doing over here? I'm looking at you all. Okay? Not really focusing on any one person, but I'm in your general area, touching on a few faces here and there. You get the sense of feeling, bless you. You get the sense of feeling as if I'm paying some attention. Okay? Second thing you do is kind of the small group. Well, how you two doing today, right? Really focusing on you, focus on you two now. Look at you two over here, okay? Small groups, you make the eye contact, you keep doing what you're doing, but you bring people in through that, okay? Now, if I tell me your name again? Steve, thank you, okay? If I'm over here talking the whole time to Steven, and my eyes are focused on him, I keep talking, I'm not looking away, he's starting to inch his chair a little bit backward here, I can't say it, blame him. It gets a little creepy, right? Okay? Don't want to do too long with any one person. A couple of seconds, no matter how physically attractive the person may be, okay? Your check is in the mail, Steve. Check is in the mail. Yeah.
Fresh haircut.
But the third way you do want to do is that personal contact as well. You do want to connect with individuals while you're speaking to a big group and focus on them briefly. Okay, not so much that Steve and I have to leave the room. Okay? You want to make sure that you distribute your attention to your listeners and that you give them your full attention when communicating verbally. Okay? That's really key. The worst thing in the world you can do for yourself is have a conversation with someone and not give that person the sense that you give a damn what they're saying. Because then why the hell are you having the conversation? And all the benefits as far as building the rapport, as far as communicating information, as far as persuasion, boom, out the window. Okay? I'd also recommend whenever you're presenting, okay, and this could be, again, under a whole bunch of different circumstances, right? Roadmap your thing like that, okay? Let your audience know what you're going to talk about so they're prepared for it, okay? Keep in mind, how much do we recall from what we hear? Between 10 and 25%, depending on the nature of the information and the people involved. 10 and 25%. We fail that test every single time, folks, no matter how much we think we're paying attention. So what do we want to do? Let them know where we're going, and then at the end, give them some takeaways. Let them know, hey, these are the things I want you to really feel from this talk. Okay? You also want to have movement in here as well. Okay? Now, too many presenters get stuck in one place. Right? Sometimes we hide behind a podium or a desk. Sometimes we just feel very comfortable being close to our notes, close to our computer, or whatever it happens to be. You can use movement in very specific, very conscious ways, though, to reinforce your key points. The best times to use movement, and hand gestures as well, are when you're either looking to emphasize a point or transition from one idea to the next. Then you use movement to catch your viewer's eye and to signal that you're moving on to the next point. Now, just to reiterate, for one-on-one, eye contact, much more important than it is for groups. Handshake, it seems like such a silly thing, folks. You'd be surprised how many people have completely unsatisfactory handshakes. Okay? What's that?
I usually don't shake hands.
Well, and some people don't. Some people don't. Within U.S. professional culture, it's usually expected, right? Not always, though. I mean, there are ways to get around it. If you do shake hands, though, make sure that your handshake is relatively firm and that it's a fairly quick handshake. What they call the dead fish handshake, right? Where you just sort of put your left hand in, it feels like someone's squeezing a fish. No good. Okay? The over-enthusiastic, going to break your arm at the wrist. Handshake, also no good. Okay? Unfortunately, for a whole lot of stupid reasons, this works against women more than against men very often. Okay? Generally speaking, the sort of turned handshake for a woman, not the best signal to send. Okay? Better to do a proper handshake, or a standard handshake, I should say. Okay? But do make sure, right from the get-go, any kind of professional communication, that you're identifying points of overlap, points of similarity, and you're giving expressions of interest to what the person has to say. Okay? That's the only way to make sure you can build that rapport. And again, don't dominate. Even if you've got a big message to give, do not focus on getting your thing out to the exclusion of what they have to say. Okay? Now, we talked about all these. Remember, for presentation, movement is important to break up your ideas and to draw attention. Gestures, I go a little wild with gestures, folks. Okay, there must be some Italian somewhere in my background. Doesn't look it. But it's important to use your hands, use your facial expressions to get your message across, to convey greater sincerity, and of course, for emphasis more than anything else. We've talked about eye contact. Make sure in your voice, in a presentation, more than in any other type of communication, you're focusing on changing up your pitch, changing up your tone, and your pace. Now, I want to talk about three basic categories of written communication here. Okay? Emailing, texting, formal writing, career communication. Here I'm talking about resumes, cover letters, job search type things. First point I want to get across is that don't think that the rules of email are that different from the rules of regular professional communication. This goes back to what we were saying earlier in terms of titles, in terms of formality, right? Formality of address. Always err on the side of treating every email as you would a formal mailed letter. Now, you don't mail letters very often, but the same principles apply, right? And what does that mean? Well, that means, first, proper formatting. Salutation line, skipping a line, using for each paragraph, right? What we call block format. Y'all know what I'm talking about with that? Okay. Two basic ways we were taught back in the day to make a paragraph. Okay. Block format would be a paragraph, then skip a line to another paragraph. Okay. Indent format would be where the first line of a new paragraph starts 5 spaces in each time, and you don't skip a line. This is preferred for business communication. Block format, left justified, skip a line for every new paragraph. Okay? Same should apply to email when it's a formal email. So make sure to have a subject line in every professional email you send. Why? Well, again, sends a message to the receiver. Hey, this is what it's about. This is why you should pay attention. Calls it in. Second, makes it a whole lot easier to keep track of your own communications that way. Right? Salutation, make sure your email has a signature as well. I don't mean an electronic signature. I mean one that indicates your name, your title, and your basic contact information to the extent you want those shared. Okay? It can be very difficult to have to hunt through prior emails to find somebody's phone number, somebody's email address, someone's mailing addresses. Okay? Wherever possible, make sure that you've got that in the bottom of your email. Now, check your grammar. Okay? Keep in mind, folks, the grammar check and spell check in Microsoft Word, in Outlook, etc. It's like a dumb friend. You all have dumb friends, right? Okay. I hope so. Remember, if you don't have dumb friends, you're the dumb friend, okay? So be careful about that, okay? So, those spell check, grammar checks are dumb friends. They can often find things that are wrong but they can't tell you why. Right? And they may fail to identify a lot of grammatical errors. They may fail to identify a lot of spelling errors as well. And they may identify things as errors that are actually perfectly fine. So take it with a big grain of salt. The fact that you put your email or your paper through the Microsoft grammar check in no way absolves your responsibility to make sure it's actually correct, folks. Okay? Remember, emailing should not be like texting. Okay? No abbreviations. No emoticons.
SMH.
Only send email. This is especially important in any sort of a group email to those you need to know. Okay? If in a professional context you're sending email and some of the people on the list don't really need to know this kind of stuff, don't care about this stuff, that's a waste, clogging up your communication. And always, always, always remember, email was meant to be brief. Okay? 6-page email should never, ever happen. People do. And try to keep the number of attachments or links to an absolute minimum. Emailing. Sometimes better, from a clarity standpoint, to have attachments come in separate emails, okay? So that people know. Now, texting. Right? Don't mean to sound all old behind the times. Not much of a texter. Most people in my generation are not. But it's gaining some traction in the business world. Okay? Usually among younger people, usually in less formal occupations. Okay? Keep in mind that lack of formality can sometimes be difficult. Obviously, you're not going to be able to communicate with the same depth. Recommend that for any important message, neither text nor email. Right? Anything important in depth, right? These can start it. Those should always be phone or face-to-face conversations whenever humanly possible. Right? While you're texting, you have a very limited paper trail to keep track of ideas. Right? It's much easier to use email as a platform in a professional sense that way. Again, every organization is going to be different. Every person has a different set of hot buttons with regard to that as well. Now,
Question about email.
oh yes, yes.
How do you feel about the thank you and welcome email?
When does the conversation end, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, like sometimes it's a lot of nice, sometimes it's annoying when you get like thank you.
Agreed. I think once my standard is once the thank you has been delivered, stop it. No more you're welcome, no more thank you for thanking me. Okay? None of that crap. So I'm with you there.
Do the thank you.
Do the thank you, but stop it there.
Okay.
Okay? And then it's incumbent upon the thank-ee not to push it again. Absolutely true. Good question, though. Yeah, because otherwise the chain gets unmanageable, especially if you're talking multiple people. One thing I can't stress enough for any type of formal writing we do is to plan it out in advance. Okay? Have a sense of the questions we asked before. What are you trying to communicate? What are your goals for this? Okay? And then give yourself a good old-fashioned outline. Okay? Quick question. How many of you, when you're writing a paper, say for Professor Dr. Koehler, how many of you use an outline before you start? The rest of you, stop yourselves twice, okay? It is so crucially important to keep that framework for yourself, right? Because keep in mind, you may know in your mind what you're trying to accomplish here. The more transparent you make your structure, and that can involve the use of headings, certainly the use of topic sentences within each paragraph, right? Maybe even a formal table of contents, depending on what type of formal writing this is. All of those elements of organization serve to do what? Make your communication clearer. That's what we're all about, folks. That's the only thing we're focused on. How do we make the communication as clear as possible? And having a solid structure that allows the reader to know when you're moving on from one topic to the next, tremendously important that way. We've talked about grammar. I'm big on this. Here's the thing, folks. Not everyone will realize when you use bad grammar. But for the people who do notice, a lot of them are going to care. And it doesn't say something good about you. Okay? So do focus on that. Make sure to be precise and professional in your language. Okay? The tone in formal writing should always, again, be audience determined. But generally speaking, most of the types of formal writing you're going to do require a more neutral tone. Right? Require a more dispassionate and professional tone. And obviously, focusing on drawing in your evidence, crucial for any type of professional communication. Obviously for papers and such, yes. But even within the realm of what you're doing outside in a professional context, the more you can embed your writing in solid evidence, the better off you're going to be, folks. So I want to talk a little bit about two very important types of writing that most of you will probably have to do very soon. Okay?
Just before you move on to make email.
Sure.
So when I'm at work, a lot of what I have to do is talk to someone on the phone first, and then
Send an email confirming the details of what you talked about.
yes.
Okay.
Sometimes that's a very awkward email to write because you're repeating a conversation you just had.
Mm.
Do you have any advice for those? Because they're about 50% of the emails I send.
Wow. Okay. That's a very good question and a difficult situation, right? The first thing is to make it very clear from the outset. The purpose of the email is to confirm these details we just discussed, right? Second, in that context, it would be perfectly fine to do you make use of like bullets or numbered lists? Okay. That's a perfect example where that sort of mechanism for conveying information is much more valuable, right? And I think that breaks up the, oh, I've already heard this kind of thing, because it feels more structured that way, right? If you were to put that all just in text, right, within a paragraph, various terms and conditions, for instance, that might feel a little overwhelming, right? But yeah, frame it right from the outset. The purpose of this is to confirm these details we just discussed so that everyone's on the same page. And here's where you can, I assume these are clients you're talking to, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that you can have it for your records, right? You frame it in those terms, it almost sounds as if you're doing them a favor by sending it, right? And if you get that mode across, they'll respond to it much better. And I imagine you probably at some point have to say, please confirm that these are the details we discussed, right? But that's a good way to circle back and close the loop. Okay? And if you get a thank you, don't send the you're welcome one, right? Excellent. Good question. Other questions on the writing end before we jump into talking about resumes, cover letters? Okay. So, resumes and cover letters are here to do what? Open doors. There you go. See? I got to hit you over the head with it every time, right? Okay. They're here to open doors for us. How many of you are perfectly happy in the job you now have and have no intention of switching anytime in the next 5 years? So you're the only one.
Oh.
Couple. Okay, very few. Okay? That's good.
Love my job.
Right? You're in school, right? You should be thinking about your next professional step, certainly. Okay, makes good sense to me. And let's face it, is anyone averse to making more money? Yeah? Got too much already, my friend? I figured. Hey, we'll talk afterwards. I'll help you with your problems. Okay? That said, how do you get yourself out there? How do you start to build that brand, market yourself? Well, it starts with your resume. Okay? Now, I spent the first 10 years of my career as a headhunter and later owned a recruiting firm here in Boston. And I've spent a good part of the last, well, many, many years. I don't want you to be able to do the math. Since then, also in a hiring role in different places. The one thing I've consistently found is that most resumes suck. And they suck pretty bad. Okay? There is no one right way to put together a good resume. But there are a hell of a lot of ways to do it wrong. Okay? I want to talk about some of the basic principles because I see this all the time and I know it interferes with people's ability to move up the food chain, so to speak, professionally. Okay? I do also have print samples of ones that you can use as well. I'll hand out at the end. So, that's your door, of course. Okay? So, a couple of the things I want to focus on that make a resume good. Lots of things that make them bad, too. We'll talk about those. Clear format is extremely important. Anyone know how long the average recruiter spends looking at a resume?
3 or 4 seconds.
About 30 seconds. Okay? Can someone get a full sense of everything you've done professionally in 30 seconds? No. Right? They're just doing a quick scan. All right? Picking up some of the key points. So the clearer you can make it for them to understand what you've done and where you've done it, the better a response your resume is going to get, folks. Okay? I'm a firm believer in labeling the sections of your resume and having them clearly demarcated from one another. I'll show you a sample in a second. Okay? Another important thing, make sure to have a balance of space. I sometimes see resumes where someone says, well, these things called margins, they're very personally restrictive. I just want to get rid of them all. Let me push out text to every single edge of this paper, right? Like 1/4-inch margins all the way around, 8-point font. Okay? That's just dumb, folks. Okay? Because your resume, as a marketing tool for you, should also have an attractive feel to it. Okay? That means there should be enough print on there so people think, well, yeah, this person's done stuff. Okay? But also enough white space that it's easier to read as well. Okay? Now, probably the most important points of these two here I'd like to make about the resume. First is in terms of what we call active language. Okay? What do you mean we say active language, folks? That's not right.
Maybe using action verbs.
You bet your bippy, my friend. Absolutely. What are some good action verbs, sir? From a resume standpoint.
From a resume standpoint?
Produce.
There we go. Produce. What else?
Coordinate.
Lead. I like lead.
Coordinate.
Coordinate. Absolutely.
Facilitate.
Like that too.
Managed.
Develop.
Sorry?
Develop.
Develop. Excellent. I would throw manage, control, direct. These powerful verbs, folks, talk about someone who does something. Okay? What do employers want? They want doers. Okay? I'm not talking about the mid-market, blended scotch. Right? Okay. They want people who are going to roll up their sleeves and get stuff done. That's a theme I'm going to keep coming back to with regard to your resume. Okay? Active language talks about what you've done, what you've accomplished. Active language shows someone who's kicking ass and taking names, as they say, right? That's what we're looking for on your resume. Okay? It is, of course, the best time to toot your horn. How you do it is important. Make sure you focus on your selling points. Okay? What makes you the right candidate? What makes you worthy of consideration for a higher level position? Is it your education? Is it your professional experience? Is it a specific skill set you bring to the table? Is it your incredible personality? All of the above.
Yes.
Good man, good man. Whatever it happens to be, that's what you want to focus on, and you want to build your selling points in part around that. Okay? Obviously, the more concrete you can make those, the better. Obviously, the more you can tailor your skills, your strengths to that position you're looking for, the better.
Yeah.
Okay? It's very important.
I agree. I'm a hiring manager, and I see that people, I think when they send their resume, they say, well, I want to work in public health. I want to work for the Boston Public Health Commission because it's one of the leading agency in, health department in the country. I'm like, well, that speaks nothing to the position. So I'm like, trash can. And the other thing that I want
Good man. You see another plant in the audience. Thank you, my friend.
Then it's just like the person did not take time to actually, the job I posted is important for my department. So like that means they had they took no time to actually see what's important for the position. And the other thing I want to point out, I don't know if you're going to talk about, is the length of your resume.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I see college students just get out of college and they have 2-3-page resume. I'm like, well, you're not a CEO, so like, no, I'm serious. Like, it's and I've given people that feedback whenever I want young people to, to actually move ahead. And I've talked to people about it. I said you cannot have a long resume because no one's gonna look at it like that. So especially, I was the champion of chess club, the champion of this and that. It's like, honestly, no. I mean, it's good for people you to talk about, and there's some things you should include. But I mean, no one wants to know all of that.
What you want to say to them sometimes is, you ain't all that.
Yeah. No,
right?
I mean, I'm not saying,
No, I'm with you on that, and you actually brought up a couple points that are going to be in my thing. So your check is in the mail too.
So what also when he says listing those other things, like champion the chess club and stuff like that, those should be your interview.
Exactly. Those are your nice little human interest aspects that you can pull out.
On the interview. And you should have probably 5 to 6 working resumes that you go through and polish up every time, and you're sending out to different places. If you're sending out one standard resume to everywhere, you're gonna get the same standard answer, which is no.
Absolutely true. Absolutely. Even worse when you talk about cover letters, which we will too. But excellent point.
I'm sure you're going to get to this, but the objective. Is that, does anyone really want that?
There are times when it makes sense, and we'll talk about those. Not every time, and not for every person, right? As a general rule, folks, if it's obvious to any abject bozo from looking at your resume what type of position you want, don't put an objective. But if you're switching fields, or if you've done work in a couple of different areas that maybe don't seem like they relate, then an objective can make sense, right? As a way to sort of focus your experience. So this is a sample of what I might suggest a good resume ought to look like. So, a couple of things. First, contact information up top. Okay. Do not use an unprofessional email on your resume. You'd be surprised, right?
That's true.
So even if your primary personal email does happen to be bootylicious29@yahoo.com, don't put that on your resume, okay? There we go, absolutely. Also, same applies to the phone. Keep in mind, older people like to use the telephone. They may call you when you're part of the job. And I know, the thought of using the telephone to actually talk with people feels so foreign to them. But it happens, right? Make
Sometimes
sure.
you do, phone interview. Just
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Even before that, a phone screen.
Okay, but you
right?
like phone screens. I'm like, okay, maybe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And make sure, and you may not always be able to answer, right? Make sure you have a professional message on your voicemail. Because it's kiss of death otherwise. And I can't tell you how many times I've called up candidates, gotten to the voicemail.
The fake hello?
Yes. The worst voicemail trend ever.
That is the
right?
worst.
Where someone pretends to be answering, says, hello?
that one.
Hello? Oh, I'm just kidding you. This is my voicemail, right?
Bye.
That kind of stuff, yeah. Out of a job.
Yes, Steve, we know that's your voice.
Not music, folks. Okay? Anything involving Justin Bieber is especially off limits. Okay? Just so y'all know. So, some of the other, by the way, people ask me a lot about whether I need to put my mailing address on the resume. Okay? There's some debate about that. I always prefer to see it because as a hiring manager, I want to know what I'm going to need to do to bring the person in to talk with him or her, right? And how reasonable a commute it may be under current circumstances. Right?
Yeah, but can't that rule you out? Like as a hiring manager, I want to see it too. But
Yeah.
as an applicant, I would never put it if I'm out of the area because it could be something that would rule me out.
True. Well, but that is something you can address in your cover letter, right? I've always wanted to live in San Francisco. I'm, available to relocate as of Jan 1, that kind of thing.
And I'm going to bring up another issue. So the equity issue that comes in racism comes into play. Like when I lived in Dorchester for years, and my wife lived there, and she was highly qualified, got 2 master's degrees. She would put Boston, just because other people might discriminate.
Absolutely. No, that's a very good point, my friend. Very good point.
So,
True. And then you can't even really list the zip code, right? Because let's face it, Boston, long history of deeply entrenched racism. 9 times out of 10, you know someone's zip code, you know his or her ethnicity.
It's like, oh, we assume.
Right? Yeah, you're absolutely right. So there may be reasons to leave it off where you can. Now the objective, again, only if you're just starting off, right? If you're going to be graduating, don't really have much in the way of professional experience, you may want to put an objective in there to focus the person reading it on what you want them to take away. Otherwise, it's kind of filler, kind of throwaway. Okay? The more meat you have to talk about, the less things like objectives you want to put. Okay? Now, you always want to start with your best element, right? Your strongest element, lead from there. Okay? Whether that's your education, your experience, your skills. Okay? So, what should it contain? Well, in terms of your education, list any degrees, not high school. You'd be surprised. Now, there are 2 exceptions. Okay? If you went to a famous high school, I don't mean, my high school is the, the most famous in my neighborhood of Topeka, Kansas, right? Not that kind of famous, like an Andover, Exeter, Bronx High School of Science, famous. Then you list it. Or if you went to a high school outside of your native country, then you can put it as well. Okay? Otherwise, boom, no. Okay?
Sorry, you didn't talk about LinkedIn, because I've had experiences where people actually put it. When I go and download it, it's like 3 things. I'm like, what? Like the resume. So I mean,
I see. No, I prefer to have a LinkedIn, a LinkedIn link, if you will.
People
on the
sometimes
resume.
send, you go get the email because all the hiring is online, obviously. So and then it's like some crazy stuff. I'm like, what is this? So I mean, sometimes I'm giving people courtesy, so listen, email me a resume, but
yeah, that's
a good idea.
That's always preferable, right? By the way, if it's a job you really want, email it and send a hard copy of your resume and cover letter through the mail. People like getting mail, right? As long as it's not junk mail, right? Something addressed to them, looks important, nice paper, right? Little things like that can make a huge difference in your job search. Do you list your GPA?
It's good.
It's above 3.5.
Only if it's good, okay? And only for like your first or second post-college or post-grad school job, okay? You can take it off after that once you're established. Okay? What's a good GPA?
3.4 or above.
Starts with a 3, okay? For your undergrad, right? For your undergrad GPA, if it starts with a 3, put it, okay? If it starts with a 4, you're probably lying. If it starts with a 2, you probably shouldn't be in the program. Probably should send you to Northeastern. Sorry. No. But here's the thing. If it's not on there, recruiters will sometimes assume that it's not very good. That's why if it's good, I recommend putting it on there.
So for architecture school, it's pass-fail.
Aha!
So I've always wondered, I've never gotten a good answer to this.
Okay.
I don't know.
So you did not get a GPA, you only, so it's like almost competency-based, if you will, that way. Okay. So I would just have a line explaining that, you know, which college?
California College of the Arts.
Okay. So CCA employs a strictly pass-fail evaluation system for the Department of Architecture, like in italics or something under the school.
Oh, okay.
Right? So you get it right out there, just so there are no questions. Right?
I
But
don't
that is,
even think that you need to really list it from you. What does it matter, right? One way or the other.
well, but people will wonder sometimes. That's the thing, right? So if you get asked about it, that's
Just
an
put a
easy.
3A.
Yeah, that means your 2 options are a 0 or a 4.
Yeah. It's all binary. Don't appropriate. If you don't have a lot of work experience to talk about, right? Talk about honors you have from your education, right? Scholarships, awards, right? Dean's list, this kind of stuff, right? Employers eat that stuff up, okay? Keep in mind, if you went to college in China, how many of you went to college in China? Okay. What does that mean? You all got at least a 3rd-class scholarship, probably a 2nd-class scholarship, 1st-class scholarship, right? People in the US don't realize that everybody gets them. So what may not seem like a big deal to you might be a big deal to the employer. Put those on your resume, okay? If you've got any relevant projects you worked on with faculty, I don't mean you wrote a paper on this in freshman year, right? But if you did a semester-long project, for example, on the Green Line extension, and you're applying to the MBTA for a job, we'll talk about that project. Put it on your resume. Okay? You'll see what I'm talking about, right? And also, if you don't have much else to talk about, and if you want to hit some of those keywords employers are looking for, pop the titles of a couple of your best sounding courses on your resume.
I would say even if it's not the exact titles, then you can say things like urban economics, but you don't have to say urban design and development. You can just say design, So more sort of the thematic areas, research,
Exactly.
I've also done workshops attended. Like if I didn't necessarily because my degree wasn't necessarily related to what I was applying for, so I did workshops attended, and I would do something like maybe not like I don't know this one or whatever.
Excellent. No, that's a great idea. Great idea. Okay, and depending if it were attached to your education, then it can go under the education. Otherwise, you can put it in a separate section, right? If they were sort of through your job. In terms of your experience, okay, remember, and this goes back to your point earlier, my friend, okay? Unless you've graduated from college and have been working for more than 10 years, 10 years of post-undergraduate, you're still limited to 1 page, folks, okay? It's you can be a little bit more flexible sometimes if it's in a nonprofit social service sort of category, right? But generally speaking, under 10 years, 1 page.
Yes.
Excellent question.
Like for example, I may have 10 years of just been in the military, and then I have years prior to that, but I have a total of 10 years or 15 years altogether, and then so they're like, okay, prior to that, what were you doing? Yeah, so somebody would keep saying they want a timeline and this and that, but sometimes it's not possible.
No, and sometimes the timeline isn't something you want them to know about.
Exactly.
All right. So where you have, all right, a good That's why I have up here dates and gaps, right? Where you've got a good reason for the gap. Fill it in, okay? With a brief explanation, right? So for example, right? Fairly common these days, someone has to take care of a sick relative, sometimes terminally ill relative, for an extended period of time, right? And oftentimes people will leave the workforce for a while to do so. That's a perfectly fine explanation, right? So 2011 to 2012, cared for ill relative full time. Okay? Something in there that lets the person looking at your resume know that you're aware of the gap and you have a good explanation for the gap. Okay? One thing you don't ever want to do is just not have dates or years in there. Okay? Complete red flag. Okay? If I look at a resume and I don't know when a person did what, I stop reading. Okay? 30 seconds. You got 30 seconds to catch someone's attention, 30 seconds to give them a sense that, yeah, you might just be a person worth talking to about this job. Okay? Now, going back to your question, my friend, if you've got a gap that's before a long string of solid employment, I don't think you need to worry about it, right? Gaps are most troubling for an employer when they're more recent, right? If you've got a gap from 15 years ago, what was he doing? Maybe he was traveling Europe. Maybe he was, you know, sitting back eating bonbons, right? Whatever it happened to be, not as big a deal. If it were the last few years, then I'd worry a little bit more about it. Especially if there's experience such as military experience that comes after the gap, right?
Are you going to talk about also fluctuations in jobs? All the time I see resumes that every year they change. I'm like, well, I don't know.
Well, that's true. That's okay. Here's a key thing to worry about from the way employers think today. Okay, keep in mind, if you are a member of the millennial generation, and most of you in this room are, then employers have certain stereotypes and assumptions about you. Some of which are valid, some of which are crap, but we still need to deal with them anyway. Okay? One that you just related to is the idea of job hopping, right? Employers tend to think that younger people today do not stay long in particular jobs and want to hop from job to job to job. Comes along with a perceived sense of entitlement. I've been here 6 months, where's my corner office and new title, right? You want to work against those assumptions, right? What does that mean? Well, that means, first, of course, in building your career, stability helps. You don't need to be 10 years in the same place, but you need to be in one place long enough to learn the ropes and make a difference before you move on. Okay? Second thing is in terms of how you present it. Okay? If you've had a series of short positions over time, try to present them collectively. Okay? Right? Presenting, the image that these were, by design, temporary or short-term positions. Exactly, right? So maybe you say, 2014 to 2016, short-term assignments with various regional employers, including blah, 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 blah. Okay? Something like that to break up the 4 months, 6 months, 2 months, 1 year sort of look. Okay? When your positions, your past positions, include duties that are obvious from the title, don't list them again. So, say you were, right, what did I do in college? Well, I had almost every job you can imagine, but I was the assistant manager of a Turkey Hill Minute Market, right? A little convenience store. Did it? What's that? No, I only assisted. I only assisted in the manager. That was too much responsibility for me. So what did I do? Right? I managed employees. Right? I opened and closed the store. Right? I stocked shelves. I rang up purchases. Duh. We can assume that whoever's reading your resume has been in a convenience store. Right? And knows what goes on there, basically. Right? So don't list all those self-explanatory duties. What are you going to focus on instead? I'm glad you asked. Your accomplishments. Here's the phrase I want you to keep in mind when you're doing your resume. Most important phrase. How have you added value to the organizations of which you've been a part? How have you added value? Could be bringing new ideas. It could be training new employees. Could mean developing new programs. Could mean being #1 in sales. Could be providing consistently excellent service to your clients. Whatever it happened to be, focus on those. Talk about what you did. Talk about the mark you left where you've been before. That's what employers want to hear about.
So, can you give an example? So, generally at a younger stage in your career, you don't have that many accomplishments. But you want to be able to express the things you're doing without sounding,
That's true. That's true. Well, depends on the type of job. I'll stick with the convenience store example, right? What are my accomplishments there? Okay. Well.
No, let's say that somebody has. Sorry, I didn't.
Oh no.
Like somebody is a graduate assistant or has worked in the university.
Mm-hmm. So a graduate assistant, great example, right? So worked closely with Professors Smith and Jones to identify research resources for a project on water in Ghana. Okay, that gets to the heart of what was done, but also elevates it a bit. Okay, organized 3 different department-wide meetings with over 200 people in attendance. Okay? These kinds of things. Make it as specific as possible, every single accomplishment. Now, you also should talk about any tangible skills you have. Okay? This sometimes feels a little silly, but keep in mind, so many resumes now are uploaded into a central database for a larger firm. Right? When a job becomes available, the hiring manager gives keywords to HR or inputs them, him or herself, in the system. See who pops up. Depending on the keywords the employer selects, your resume may or may not pop out. Depends on whether you've got those keywords in your resume. Okay? So even though it may seem silly, well, yeah, everybody knows how to use Microsoft Office. Okay? True. Not everybody was. And truth of the matter is, not everybody does know how to use it. And if you have greater skill with that, that's something you can use to set yourself apart as well, right? Especially with something like Excel, something like SPSS, right? Something that's going to be used, something that's a rarer skill in depth, right? How many of you speak a language other than English? How many of you at least studied a language other than English? Great. Put it on the damn resume. Okay? You do not have to be fluent in the language to put it down. But be honest on the resume about your level of proficiency. All right? Okay? About 90% of the Spanish I know comes from the Speedy Gonzalez cartoon. So Spanish doesn't go on my resume. I did take French for 5 years in high school. Right? Old French back then.
Were you in high school for 5 years?
What's that?
Were you in high school for 5 years?
Well, 7, but I was slow, right? That goes on. This, not the slow part. They picked that up through the interview. But that goes on. I'm honest about the level, right? I'm almost, near native fluency in German. That goes on. So the levels go on. Now, sehr gut. Das gefreut mich zu hören. Später könnten wir ein bisschen zusammen sprechen. Ugly language, by the way, folks, I have to say. Good beer, ugly Do not, if English is not your native language, do not put it on your resume in the U.S. Because the assumption is if you're in the U.S., you're fluent in English. You're getting a degree from a U.S. institution, you're fluent in English. Okay? And you don't want to call attention to the fact that English is not your native language right from the get-go. Okay? Why? Because as you mentioned before, discrimination, right? Discrimination can happen based on what your name looks like, right? Whether it appears to be non-native, whether it appears to be African American. These things will happen, right? Horrible, but we need to work around it. If you have any certifications, right? Even something as silly as CPR, put it on your resume, right? You never know when it's going to spark a little conversation. Okay? If you have no real work experience and you need something to fill it up, you can list some characteristics or personality traits. Not a big fan personally, okay? But there are some things that you definitely don't want to list, okay? For example, okay, your personal data. Okay? You do not list any personal data other than your name, address, email, phone, and perhaps LinkedIn address. Okay? You cannot list your age legally, or employers can't ask anyway. Your marital status, what your parents do for a living. Okay? None of that should appear. Nor should your picture be on there. Okay? However good looking you are, folks. Okay? Don't put your picture on. Okay? Objective we talked about, under certain circumstances it might make sense.
I just want to say, if you're applying overseas,
then it's a different story.
Use your picture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Then you also, in some countries, for example, in Germany, it's customary to include the name of your spouse, your children and their ages, who your parents are, what they do for a living. Very weird. Very weird. From our standpoint, right? Profile qualifications. If you've been out there working for 15 years or more, you can summarize some of your key skills at the top under this sort of head. Okay? Otherwise, no. Your hobbies. Are you going to list those, folks? No. If they're relevant, or if they're really, really cool, or if you have some amazing accomplishment, right? Remember, it's not a personal ad, not your Facebook page, right? Okay. By the way, under no circumstances should hobbies like watching movies or especially playing video games anywhere near your resume. Okay. Remember, old folks think your generation is a little bit slack. Don't want to reinforce that idea.
I think that hobbies is also kind of, people have really narrowed down what they think hobbies are. And so, like, for example, for me, hobby is like doing a lot of like racial justice work. And that's like what I do on my free time, and I really enjoy like running workshops or doing like, so like something like that.
Yeah, that's more a professional volunteer activity. That's worthwhile, right? If, for example, you have a belt in a martial art, that can go on your resume, okay? If you are, if you were the state champion in the pole vault junior year of college, that can go on, okay?
Are you going to talk about also people's social media? Because I'll be honest, I do go on social media and share, and I've seen people, when I see their work, up and right, like I'm old, right? So I'm like, nope. I mean, all kinds of nonsense. So.
Yeah. Keep in mind, folks, you raise a good point here. Nowhere to run to, baby. Nowhere to hide. Your social media presence is out there. Okay? Clean it up when you go on the job market or before. Okay?
Ever.
Well, even privacy settings are a little dicey. There are employers who will ask you to give them access to your social media accounts before hiring. Now, I find that ethically quite dicey.
I just do a quick shift.
Yeah, but you do have to be careful, folks. Okay.
And also with that, if you're using LinkedIn, your LinkedIn better match as close as possible to your resume.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. No fast and loose ones here, folks. It's too easy for people to verify the information you put out there. Okay, and that's the kind of thing that gets you instantly axed. Remember, here's the key. Today, the focus for recruiters especially is on screening applicants out. Okay. Why? Oh, you put out a job and you get 200 responses. You can't take the time to look each of those over very carefully. So what do you have to do? Find ways. Sometimes they're smart ways, sometimes they're simply arbitrary ways. Find ways to narrow down the field. So when I'm scanning through a resume, okay, and I see, big gap here. Toss it aside. Scanning down the resume, I see, no skills listed. Toss it aside. Employers will always look for ways to screen you out, to rule you out of a position, rather than to include you for it. Okay? Talk about your personal data. Your references do not belong on your resume, folks. Okay? A separate sheet of paper provided only when asked for. Okay? And do make sure that the people who are going to serve as references for you know that. Okay?
And that know the job that you applied for.
And know the job you applied for, right? Because otherwise it looks like you're out just applying for everything, right? You don't want to send that signal. Okay?
William, you want to leave some time for Q&A?
I will, yeah. A couple more quick things. So, some of the do's: use active, powerful verbs. These are some suggestions. Focus on how you have contributed to the organization. Put numbers on things whenever you can. Train 7 new employees, right? Provided services to 200 clients in the Metro Boston area. Numbers look great whenever you put them. And remember, there is no excuse, folks, for typos, grammatical errors. Most recruiters I know use a rule of 3. 3 mistakes of any kind, resume and cover letter, boom, you're gone. Okay.
Dollar amounts as well.
Oh yeah, we love money. Show me the money, my friend. How big was the budget you managed? How big were the grants you brought into the office or you oversaw? Right? These kinds of things give a sense of the scope of your authority and position. Right? So some don'ts. Okay? Do not use these phrases, please. Whenever I read duties include blah, blah, blah for some job, I'm already asleep. Active verbs. What did you do? Tell us what you did. Okay? Don't list those boring tasks. Don't include a whole bunch of silly little stuff, right? Going back to your ping pong champion comment earlier, right? Somebody said, right? Sure. Maybe great that you were the ping pong champion in 6th grade, but it's not going to get you the job, right? Do not lie. Too easy to get caught, and don't go over a page. So, little 10 commandments for resumes here. Okay. A couple I really want to focus on. Number 5 here. Tailor it to each job category or industry. You do not need a completely different resume for every single job. You do need a different resume for every type of job or every level of job. Okay? You do, and we'll talk about this in a moment, you do need a completely different cover letter for every single job for which you apply. That's probably the biggest bugaboo that gets more applications tossed than anything else. Okay? So, a couple of little notes on the cover letter, folks. Okay? First, I'm a firm believer in keeping it short. 2/3 of a page maximum. Remember, they're not going to sit there and read it the whole time. Okay? Only after your resume has made a dent will your cover letter be read carefully. Okay? Again, block format, I recommend 4 paragraphs. Very simple. First paragraph, introduction. I'm writing to apply for the position of account manager with Bay State Social Services. I'm attaching my resume for your review. Okay? Then, and this is important, show them, this goes back to what you were saying earlier, my friend, show them you took the time to read the job posting and to think about whether you're a good fit for it. Okay? That's how you get noticed. Make sure you mention in your cover letter exactly what you think the job does and how you can do it. Also, though, talk about why you want this job. Why do you want to work for this employer? Okay? Not just, well, paycheck. Okay? Think about what the organization likes about itself. How does it present itself on its website? What's the branding of the organization? That should be your key to figuring out what you talk about in your cover letter. Okay? And an action close. You will follow up. Okay? Keep in mind, applications aren't just like the ether. Sure, you send enough out, you're going to hear something back. But if you send them out very high quality and follow up, you're going to do much better. Again, a sample here. Okay. Always, whenever possible, find a person in the organization to whom you can address this cover letter. Okay? Find the address for the organization. Put it on there. Okay? I had to have some fun with it, right?
Sometimes when I'm looking at jobs in certain fields, like product management, they don't always list who you're sending it to. So
Correct.
I was wondering, how do you interpret that?
Well, if it doesn't even list the name of the organization, right? And some don't. Some will say, it's a construction firm in Greater Boston or something. That always makes me a little suspicious. And it also suggests to me that the incumbent is still in the position and is about to get booted out, right? That explains the secrecy. So that's always a tough situation to walk into. If they list the name of the organization, but not the specific person, then try and find someone within the organization, go on the website to the extent you can, and find a suitable person. Maybe a recruiter in HR, maybe the HR manager, right? Because here's the thing. You're generally not going to go wrong sending it to the wrong person. Because that person's just going to say, oh, this belongs with Jim or Jane or whatever, right? Passes it on. If it's a reasonable thing. So an HR person, yeah, you know it'll get in, you know someone has received it that way. Okay. So, short intro, 2 body paragraphs, short action close, signature, all your contact information. Very simple. Okay? These 2 are the ones that will change every time. And they should be tailored to the specific position to the fullest extent possible. Okay? The biggest mistakes. First one is it's generic. Whenever I receive a cover letter that does not address the specifics of the position, could have been given for any job, I'm done reading. That's a clear garbage can application. Talk about the organization too. Don't make it just all about you. Okay? Try to address it to a person wherever possible. And again, formality. Bad grammar will get your resume and your cover letter tossed. And if you go on and on. Okay? Actually, about 6 weeks ago, I got an 8-page cover letter. Someone applying for a part-time teaching position. 8-page cover.
So you hired them.
How many pages did you read?
Well, I'm thinking of a number between 0 and 1.
I had a 16-page cover letter for this job.
I know that, but you're special.
It's not that.
I'm special too, we know.
But not to follow. But what I'm saying is that if it is something that is worth it, take the time. And if that one
Take the time to craft it. Yeah, there are jobs, and again, the higher level the position, the more you can get away with. The standards I talk about for the length of your resume do not apply to a CV, right? And in other words, an academic resume, which tend to be longer, right? And can run to 20 or 30 pages. Because some academics just don't know how to shut up. They're too wordy. I'm one of them, right? So, that said, a couple of takeaways for you all, okay? First is that I'd like for you to think about your professional communication as intentionally and universally as possible, right? Think about every type of interaction you're having with colleagues, with coworkers, with faculty, fellow students, prospective employers. Think of it as an opportunity to demonstrate your professionalism in communication. Second, practice, both writing and speaking, right? How many of you get a little nervous with public speaking? Fair number, yeah, okay. The only way to get over that is to do it over and over again, right? Now, I may not seem like a shy person to you. Do I seem shy? Okay. The truth of the matter is, I am. Okay. Through practice, you can work through these things and get so much better at it. And you'll find, unfortunately, our society overvalues glibness in communication. Right? Works to my benefit. I'm happy about it. Right? But you want to take advantage of that and do everything you can to put your best foot forward that way. Okay. Third thing is to make sure you put in the time to understand what you're trying to accomplish with every professional communication, especially writing, and that you direct your efforts toward that. And remember those 4 keys I talked about, right? Clarity, conciseness, correctness, cogency. 4 C's, easy enough, okay? Please keep coming back to those, folks. If you keep those principles in your mind for every type of communication, you'll stand in good stead. So, I've said my piece. What questions are on your mind, folks, about any of the types of communication we talked about?
With regard to resumes, I've seen people do like design resumes, or they'll have like a QR code that links to a website that's got their portfolio and resume. Is that something that works out, or is it gimmicky? Or
I find it personally, I think there are a couple of fields. Architecture may be one where it can make sense. But I thought QR codes had already died like 3-4 years ago personally, right? I find that a little gimmicky for most things. You do want to demonstrate that you're technologically savvy, right? Because keep in mind, we talked about those bad stereotypes older people have about millennials. The good thing is they assume you're all tech geniuses, okay? They really do, right? We know it's not quite true in all cases, but there's that assumption. But I would prefer to see, you know, a link to a website, something like that, rather than something that's over the top that way. Okay? Good question.
I have a question also about the resumes. How would you go about addressing a genuine gap in employment? Like, let's say you need to be laid off and you're trying to get back out there.
Well, it depends on the time frame. Okay. If the key number, 1 year. Okay. If it's less than a year, no need to address it on the resume. If it's over a year, then you should. Okay. And what I always like to see, or what I always recommend people do, is that they use something they were doing during that time other than job search to fill in that gap. Right? Exactly, right? Or maybe, you know, maybe some little consulting work, things like that. Okay? And don't make it up, people. There are 10 times more consulting firms on resumes in the US than there are in the US, right? It's a nice way to kind of cover that for a lot of people. But if there are things you can point to that you've done during that time, even if they weren't full-time employment in your field, then that's a good thing to put in there to cover. Good question, common issue. Right? Yes.
When you're following up on a job application, certain amount of time, a window of time that you would suggest?
I would say at least, you know, from the time you send it until you follow up, at least 5 or 10 minutes. 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a reasonable time frame for follow-up. Okay? And one suggestion, when you're doing follow-up, vary the way you do your follow-up, right? So one time you give a call, next time you send email, right? Third time maybe you show up at their house at 3 in the morning, right? Right? So it doesn't get creepy that way, right?
I would just add too, like I work for city government, so like we have to have it posted for a certain amount of time. So it says on it, like all resumes will be reviewed on this date. So like for me, it's so annoying when someone contacts me before that date because I'm like, clearly you did not read the entire thing.
Excellent point, right?
So that's like something that always is like such a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, if and you'll see some sort of public jobs or academic jobs will have that sort of time frame. If there is that time frame, adhere to it. If there's not, if it's private sector, 2 weeks is a reasonable time. But again, keep your follow-up very light. You know?
Although I have to disagree a little bit because one time, just recently, this young lady, she contacted me. I was like, oh, this is annoying. Now I read her resume. I was like, it made me sort of interested in looking at her resume. She sent me an email why she's interested in the position, and I went back and looked at her. I was like, well, she looks interesting. And then, so
I can't tell you how
it could go either
That's
way.
true.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. It depends on the person. So I wouldn't say.
I think it depends like what they say. Like I think people
Yeah.
like, oh, just following up on this resume, waiting to hear back. Like that is like.
She was more
if
detailed
it's like, I'm
and said,
interested,
listen,
yeah.
I'm really interested in this position, and blah, blah, blah. So.
You do want to put your best foot forward and keep it light, but I can't tell you how many times I've called someone for an interview because they followed up on a consistent basis, right? Keep in mind, employers are like people. They want to be wanted, right? They really do. Employers don't want you to apply to their job simply because it's a nice fat paycheck or even a skinny paycheck. Right? They want you to buy into the mission, be a part of the team. Even if it's a soulless corporate enterprise, you have to pretend to buy in, okay? Right? And part of the way you do that is by focusing on what they value.
So I think you sort of talked about it a little bit earlier, but a lot of application systems are super computerized now.
And annoying as all get out, yes.
But the people reviewing them are not necessarily super tech savvy.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of creates this worst of both worlds.
Yes, it is. One thing I recommend is where they give you an option for a message to cut and paste your cover letter into that as well.
Okay.
All right? Because sometimes they don't get read otherwise, right? Or a modified version of your cover letter is even better, right? A shorter version, but touching on some of the same points, right? Use every channel at your disposal that way. Okay? But was there more?
No, it was really that. It was like how to sort of cut through the computerized to maybe someone on the other end of it who doesn't know how the system works necessarily.
Absolutely, and it is an issue, right? Because who's probably opening those up? The lowest level HR assistant, right?
Well,
who may or may not be.
Also, I would recommend all this PDF things because sometimes people's computer and depending what format might not work. And, someone have older version and they go up. I'm like, this is like.
Yeah, definitely PDF whenever possible.
Word is.
But yeah, that's one thing to do. Another thing to do is to try to use the little human aspects you have there. And again, the follow-up. Now, in a big, big organization where everything gets routed through HR, follow-up is of less value, right? But you don't know until you try that, for sure. You had a question?
I had a professor show me that he changed the formatting in my resume because the algorithms of the computers will pick it up easier. I don't know if you know anything about that, as far as like it's the automation type of thing, and how you if it's formatted a certain kind of way, then the system picks it up, the keywords easier and better.
That how formatting impacts. I'm not quite sure, to tell you the truth. Emphasizing those keywords is tremendously important, though. Okay, that what you're talking about would probably only matter if you're talking about a web posted resume, right? So if your resume that's posted on Indeed, something like that. Okay, that might be an issue. Within a corporate system like that, no, it'd just be OCR and keyword generated.
But I do understand what you're talking about, and that's especially true in several federal level jobs.
Yeah.
And so what you want to do, and this is something that actually I have encountered with several of my students who were applying. And so what we do is, let's say you're applying for a job in FEMA, right? And you're looking at the job description. There are particular jobs across the board, words across the board, you know, resiliency, response management, things like that, which you will see in many of the ads which may be asking for folks for FEMA. So those are the kinds of keywords that the system scans, and if they have the keywords in that resume, they pick those up and give it priority. So it's not just about formatting and which comes first or not, it's actually about specific keywords that agencies are looking for at certain times.
It's the key thing with the words is definitely in federal, if you're applying for federal positions, and a lot of state and local positions.
Yeah.
It's big. I mean, it's you be like, oh, you're actually qualified for the job. You look for it, you have all the skills, everything, but the resume doesn't pick it up.
Yeah, the keyword, getting those words on there is very important. That's where, you know, some of the coursework stuff, and
So
also
scanning the job, you know, posting very, very carefully to see what are the technical words, what are the competencies they are looking for. Super important to insert it there. I know exactly what you're talking about because we came across that. So that's a great point, actually.
On a resume, what verb tense do you use for your current position?
I use active or present, simple present for current. So manage, develop, you know, the infinitive minus the two, right? And then past tense, well, past tense for any accomplishment that's already finished. So, for example, you know, developed this program, blah, blah, blah. But otherwise, anything you're doing now, you know, the infinitive minus two, present tense de facto. Right?
Past tense for prior jobs.
Past tense for prior jobs. I'm not a big fan of the gerund, the ing. Prefer just to say develop instead of developing. Other questions about any resume, cover letter stuff, job hunting?
You know, they have big presentations coming up, not next week, but the week after and after. So if you have any tips about sort of how to command the room, be heard, I know you've been saying it for 2 years, but if there are like any big takeaways. You know, one of my big things is I've seen a lot of students put like one hand in their pocket. I mean, have you ever seen me in class putting my hand in my pocket and talking? I mean, imagine this, right? They're doing this, they're kind of looking down, they're mumbling so you can't hear. And you know, I am a person with an accent, I'm a woman, and I'm short. And I try to conquer that every day when I come into public speaking, right? So it's really, really important to see how you present yourself. One of the things that are that was very valuable to me early on in my teaching career when I was in UT Austin as a grad student, you know, we went through an international teaching program for teaching assistants. So mercilessly, they would give you a topic, they would give you 5 minutes, and they would film you actually teaching to the class. And then they would break down that film and show you exactly what you were doing wrong and what you could do right. So I realized for the first year of my teaching, I would come into class, I would say hello, and then I would get stuck right there and talk like that, you know? So there's so many things that you guys do inadvertently, and it's so important. You know, claim your space, take hold of what you're going to say. Don't make apologies for what you're going to present, right? If I say, I have something exciting to present to you today, that is so much better than, I have something to tell you today. Don't put your hand in your pocket, it just doesn't work. But if you have others.
No, that's excellent. So I do want to touch upon a few things that you mentioned there. First is, one thing that drives every audience crazy is what Professor Dutta Koehler was just talking about, the reading off the screen, right? So if you're giving a presentation, do not read out the text you have on your slides.
Preparation is key.
Yeah, you need to know what's up there, right? But do not simply say, oh, Okay. So do not say, I thank you in advance for your time and consideration and look forward to hearing from you. I will follow up via telephone next week. We can read, right? If your audience can't read, you've got bigger problems than what you're presenting, right? Keep your eyes on the prize. You can look back at where you are, of course. You can point out different things. You can use some of the text that's up there, but make sure to keep your focus on the audience. Second is volume. Most students are too soft when they get up to present, and half the class can't hear. Okay? Because when you're speaking, you need to when you're speaking to a larger group, you automatically need to raise your volume a little bit. Okay? You can still modulate it, but your baseline has to be a little bit higher. Okay? Third is movement. Okay? We talked about getting stuck behind a podium. That's one thing. Then there's this sort of, middle-aged guy dancing at a wedding kind of thing when you're up talking. Don't bounce back and forth like that. Okay? Very annoying to your audience. Okay? Make your movements purposeful when you do them, but measured. Okay? You don't want to have someone feel you're trying to wear a hole in the carpet going back and forth. Okay? But do use judicious movement to keep your audience interested, and do connect individually with your audience members too whenever possible. Okay? And good luck for your presentations. Glad I won't have to judge them. So.
You're not invited.
Exactly. Well, I put my spin on it, right? Excellent. Oh yes. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. What would be best, Professor Decker?
Email?
Well, I know that.
Well, the email you're going to check.
Yeah, email I'll check. Okay, so I'll give you this is my card where I am now, basically. That's the one I check most often. So. Okay, but remember, subject.
You can't call him William just yet.
That's right, that's right. We don't know each other that well. Excellent. Other questions, thoughts, concerns, my friends? Well, I know you all have projects to work on. And I know I've been talking at you for quite a while. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for hanging with me tonight.
So I'm going to be here at least for the next 10-15 minutes and